Great. So, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the sixth webinar in the series of webinars that the Grant Thornton Not-for-Profit and CSR group has been running over the past year. So, very, very warm welcome and good afternoon to all who are attending, and of course, the eminent panelists. Amidst the difficult times that we are all going through currently, I think we are also grappling with trying to decode some of the amendments and some of the strong amendments which have happened to the CSR law, which have actually become effective January 22nd, 2021. And I thought that this is a very opportune moment for us to have an eminent panel of cross-sectional experts, ranging from corporate foundation heads, the CEO of an international NGO, and a very eminent academician and CSR thinker. And I thought that it would really bring some interesting perspectives to the table to have a cross-sectional view on some of the amendments, some of the challenges, and for us to really get an understanding of what these are. It is really indeed my absolute pleasure on behalf of Grant Thornton Bharat LLP to welcome Anurag Mishra, current head of CIPLA Foundation and working on some innovative health models in partnership with institutes of national repute. Anurag has worked with national NGOs like SEVA, multilateral donors like the USAID, and with the shift to CSR has worked with corporates like Kane India and SR prior to joining CIPLA. So welcome, Anurag, and we look forward to your views today.
Thank you very much.
We also welcome Mr. Chetan Kapoor, who is the COO of Tech Mahindra Foundation and is an extremely seasoned development professional in the education and skilling domains. Chetan, who has really conceptualized the foundation's flagship skill development program, SMART, which is now amongst the largest CSR-led urban skill development programs in India. Prior to this, Chetan has had his own consulting company, EduLever, and has been a consultant with the Tata Trust and worked with the American India Foundation and Pratham. Very warm welcome to you, Chetan, to the panel today.
Thanks a lot, Rohit. Privileged to be here.
We also very, very warmly welcome Mr. R.N. Mohanty, the CEO of Site Savers India. With over 3 decades in the social sector prior to helming operations at Site Savers India, R.N. Mohanty has worked with Care India as its Chief Operating Officer. Under his leadership, in the last 5 years, Site Savers has undertaken 15 million eye screenings and performed 1 million site restoration surgeries. So welcome, Mr. Mohanty, and we look forward to the NGO view and an NGO representation from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rohit, for having me. Thank you.
And last but not the least, respected Sudhir Sinha ji, Professor IRMA and Founder Director CSR Inc. Professor Sinha teaches responsible business management and corporate philanthropy at IRMA and is engaged in promoting a concept of transformational CSR. Sudhir has over 36 years of experience and has headed and managed CSR sustainability verticals of several corporates like Tata Steel, Reliance, and ArcelorMittal, just to name a few. So welcome, Sudhir ji, to the panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rohit.
In terms of how we are going to structure, the panel today, we are going to jump straight into, the panel discussion. We are potentially looking at a small overrun of 15 minutes. And we will utilize the 15 minutes at, after we are done with the panel to take questions. There are some questions which have actually come to us already. And you are most welcome to post your questions on the chat box. I have a team of people who will be compiling these questions, and we will use the last 15 minutes of this discussion to try and address, to the best extent possible, answers to the questions that all of you have posed. So let me start, the panel, and let me start with a common question for everybody, and I'd request Sudhir ji to go first here. So Sudhir ji, to set the context, as an academician and as a thinker and as a person who's been in this space for long, what do you think are the two maximum impact CSR amendments? And these impacts, could be positive or could be negative, but what do you think are some things which will actually kind of change the way in which actually CSR is being done?
Sure. Thank you, Rohit, for giving me this opportunity to be with you and participants this afternoon. Namaskar to everyone. As regards your question, two major changes, these amendments, but I simply like to begin with, and also if at all I have to talk about CSR law in general, then the first and foremost change which we witnessed, all of us witnessed, was about companies of a particular type, were obligated to contribute to society. Consequently, the country found the inflow of additional funds of, on average, I would say 14 to 15,000 crore to this social sector. But with regard to the amendments, the recent amendments, January 2021 amendments, I have to refer, or I have to say that these amendments definitely have made many changes, but I would definitely like to keep these things limited to 2 or 3 or maximum 4 changes quickly. The first change is the positive change, which I would talk about, that earlier the act was giving or saying that comply or explain kind of thing. A company which were mandated to spend 2% of its profits. If company was failing to spend, then company was asked to give explanation. And now this amendment is putting a full stop to it by simply making it very clear that company has to spend. So 2%, all 2% amount has to be spent. Unspent amount also has to be spent, and for that treatment of accounting for has been suggested. So this is one positive change. I would say that the government has made it mandatory, spend also the mandatory. So there is no question of comply or explain. It is only about comply. And I just quickly like to tell you that in 2017, when I had initiated this, and I myself, through multi-stakeholder approach or dialogues, we had suggested to the government to make it comply only. So that is one thing, has been done. The second positive impact of the amendment is towards making CSR measurable by introducing the mandatory clause for impact assessment for companies. However, there could be another debate, it is, of course, has been made measurable. CSR has been made measurable, but there could be a debate on how to make impact assessment more objective, because there are some gaps in understanding and practices with regard to impact assessment. This particular subject is very, very, opaque and unclear. So this is the second positive change. The third important impact the amendments have or will be making is about making companies accountable. It is linked to the point number 2, which I said just a while back. the introduction of audits by independent agencies definitely going to ensure accountability. And very surprisingly, pleasantly surprising, that CFO has been made responsible. So these are some of the positive changes, but I will also highlight 3-4 quickly changes which are desirable and government has not really given, or, or not looked at. Number one is that, government has made things very complex. The treatment of unspent amount, it should have been simply kept that, okay, any company which is not able to spend money should be given 1 + 3 years, time period to spend money. And even if the company is not going to or able to spend that much money, that unspent amount should go to, as suggested by the government itself, that national level unspent CSR amount. So immediately that should have been, transferred to that. But now bringing in clauses and sub clauses such as ongoing related projects, not ongoing related projects, these are going to make companies very uncomfortable. So how are they going to keep track of it? And I personally feel that it was not desirable. Simple. Second thing is that setup of excess amount. Companies were making their conscious choice to spend more than 2%. And this 2% is simply minimum. So at least it says that at least 2% has to be spent. So a company, if takes a conscious decision to spend more than 2%, and company also disclose it. So companies are benefited because they say that more than 2%, and that's how it goes in media or public domain, and companies are applauded for that. Now, this particular clause is going to give an, okay, this year I have spent some more than 2%, so next year and also I can just, set it off. So this is something, I feel that it was not required. The third, which is very critical, is the CSR definition. And I have been demanding for CSR definition since 2014. And every year or so, I will write to the ministry and minister, but CSR definition has not been given. Even I can tell you that one of the committee of member of parliaments also had made observations that CSR Act does not have the definition. But this year again, CSR definition, it refers to those activities which shall not be considered CSR, making it exclusive, right? So some of the 5 or 6 kind of activities will not qualify as CSR. That is what they have put it under CSR, meaning of CSR. The last one, I would say that board or CSR committee. Again here, there are 2 unnecessary layers. So CSR committee is the committee of the board, and many companies would prefer to have either board or the CSR committee taking a decision. Now the CSR policy has to be approved, the amount has to be approved by the board, and that's where companies are making mistakes. I would say the mistakes. So it's not deliberate, but some companies are making simply mistake. So I would suggest that the government should have allowed companies to either or means either the board approves it or the CSR committee of the board approves it. So these are some of my observations, initial observations. I'll definitely take more questions later. So thank you. Over to you, Rohit.
Yeah, thank you, Sudhirji, for setting the context, so well, and outlining, your views so candidly. I now request Anurag. Anurag, if in your perspective, do you what are the 2 areas which you feel have the maximum impact?
So thank you very much, Rohit, for having me here. I think Mr. Sinha has fairly covered most of the pointers, but I will just reiterate. I think from our perspective, 2 things. One is the enhanced role of the committee and the board. And that means that not just approving the project itself has a lot of other connotation attached to it. That means how project is selected, how organization is selected, or particular theme is selected. That means somewhere the committee and the board has to have those, insight to the entire process. That also means that when it goes to the committee or the board, some format, some structure needs to be put in place by whosoever is running CSR to say, no, this is what it is. And that comfort has to be given to the committee and board. And I believe that's a humongous exercise. It's not easy, especially when that role was very minimal. Now that role has expanded drastically. So I think, and then it says that you have to monitor. Now that question is, how do committee monitor a project? Does that mean committee goes to the field, or it means that you need to create a dashboard, and then through dashboard, will they have that comfort? So I think that's a big change which has happened, and I think it will take a bit of time for companies and even the board and the committee to reach a consensus to say, okay, I'm comfortable with this format which has come up. So that is one. Second, I think a welcome move from our perspective is inclusion of investment for COVID-related research. Especially they've said till 2023. I think that's a welcome move. However, there's a lack of clarity on who owns the IPR. Okay, there's lack of clarity on how the end product will be utilized. Will it be used by business, or will it be used by in a not-for-profit way? So there's a lack of clarity. But I believe in today's COVID time, that's a good way to look at how companies, especially pharmaceutical companies, can invest in such things, especially testing. We know that testing, vaccine has come up. So I think that's a welcome move, but more clarity is required on how those investments should be done. And maybe a bit of a push from government would be helpful, especially for companies who are sectoral in nature, to say, no, this is the direction which one can take by investing money more purposefully.
Great. Yeah, I definitely, Anurag, I think that's very well put. Inclusion of that clause is, so I think there are several things which are positive, and others which are fairly debatable. I think, as Sudhirji put, and what you've also outlined, is that perhaps the complexity could have been left out with. Right. And that the quantum of debate that we are doing probably is unnecessary. The changes might be welcome, but it could have been done in a manner which was more understandable to everybody. Right. So with that, I invite Chetan. Chetan, you yourself are also taking care of the affairs of a very large foundation, like Anurag, and but with focus, not so much on healthcare, but of course on the education and skilling vertical. So it would be really pertinent to understand what are your views on the two major impact areas. Chetan, thank you.
Sure, Rohit. Thanks a lot. And once again, thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. Really happy to be sharing views on this, at a time when we are actually grappling with complying. This is the first time this financial year that we have to comply. So, I mean, for me, honestly, for those of us who've been in this space for a while, it's a bit of a deja vu, because I remember when the the CSR Act itself came in 2013, we went through a similar kind of a cycle, trying to read through the Act, trying to interpret, what is it that it really connotes. And I think a lot of us left with different kinds of interpretations. In some ways, I think we are kind of going through a similar cycle. And I would expect that one can, like it happened the last time that the IICA and the MCA had come up with clarifying statements. I hope some of these would be coming, because, when it comes to the brass tacks of actually filling up some of the forms and some of the details that have been asked for, that's when you really realize that, okay, how do you address this? But having said that, I think, to answer your question, I would also first say that, let's look at it from two perspectives. The intent perspective. So the intent perspective, I think in some ways it's a welcome change, because it clearly gives more teeth to Section 135. And that's something which was definitely required, because, even after the Act came in, there was a long wait and watch kind of a policy, I mean, for many corporates. Hopefully, all of that is now going to be a thing of the past. So there is clearly an intent towards making things more clear and more, if I may use the word regulatory. Of course, that has its flip side as well, as we all know. But hopefully, going forward, earlier it looked like a little bit like a halfway house with a lot of things not being clearly explained. Now, at least we are moving towards defining these things clearly. The one really significant move that I think has been addressed, even though it still requires more clarity, is the impact assessment bit, something which I think is extremely important for those of us who've been practitioners in this space, because as we've all heard since we joined that, if it gets measured, it gets done. So the thing that there is very clear intent towards bringing in an impact measurement framework into the scheme of things is something which is a welcome move. Of course, I think it's going to take some time before we all really get to that phase where we can be more certain of how to go about it. But from the perspective that we are now all compelled to think about impact in a more measurable way, in a clearer way, I think that's definitely a welcome move and quite significant, I would say.
Great, Chetan, thank you. Thank you for that. I'd request Mr. Mohanty, from the other side of the fence. What is your what is your view, and I want you to in all the questions that I'm going to be asking you, not just represent a large international NGO, but also the eyes and ears of some of these smaller NGOs who are seeking and in the space of seeking CSR funds and working with corporates. So in your perspective, what is your opinion, and what are your top two?
Yes, I would be brief, and first of all, thank you for having me. And as Mr. Kapoor just now said, I kind of agree that it is a good attempt to be fairer, to have more clarity, and to be more transparent. So probably this is a right step in the right direction. But to be brief and be on top two, as you said, one, I would repeat what Mr. Kapoor said. This is one of probably my top one is the impact assessment piece. And the fact that, I want to link that to the fact that we can now have 1 + 3 years. So if you combine these two, we'll probably have a great kind of development project initiated by the corporates and implemented by agencies like us. And the fact that we are now trying to talk about that, there needs to be clarity on the impact assessment. But the fact that we are saying that we will start this after a year gives me a sense that it will be quick for the corporates and the implementing agency to know which programs were designed well, which were not designed well, what are the modifications we want to take, and take this up to 1 + 3, say 4 years. And particularly, agencies like us, NGOs, who have very kind of religiously followed a 5-year strategic period, and we have been struggling to, with due respect to the corporate CSR heads, we've been struggling in many cases to tell them that, no, why don't you fund us for a longer period of time rather than, April to March. So with convincing them with impacts and all this will actually now, probably in my opinion, fall in place and will overall help the beneficiaries that we are serving. So that's my number one. And the number two probably for me is clarity on this 5% administrative cost rule 5 and all of that. We have been struggling with that. Some corporates tell us, no, the 5% is for you, not for me. And, I might sound very, very selfish, but, that clarity has come in now. And so therefore, that's my number two in the top two. So thanks to Rohit.
Yeah. So Mr. Mohanty, I think so. You are looking forward to longer term MOUs, that you feel that perhaps some of these changes would change the way corporates, not even though they were thinking perhaps on a longer term basis, but they would be able to commit funds through the unspent CSR window for a longer period of time, and a 4-year window is a good start. If not
very
longer.
welcome move. Yeah.
So that's wonderful. So Mr. Mohanty, while you are talking on this subject, would like to, also ask you that, what are some of the other implications which are there for the NGO world? And is it really tougher, have these, amendments made it tougher for you on field or for some of these smaller NGOs? And if you can just give maybe one or two specific examples without maybe naming the donors, and especially the CSR donors, as to, between the amendments, from January 22nd till now, what are some of the dialogues that you're having? I mean, what are the sort of pressures, or what are the sort of kind of, sort of questions, or sort of, information flows, etc., which are happening? That'd be very useful for all of us to know.
Okay, so again, Rohit, you asked about people like us and smaller NGOs, and I consider myself a smaller NGO, but we have smaller NGOs who kind of were implementing things on our behalf and things like that. So, as you know, any change is something which takes time for people to accept and work on it properly. But one thing that actually is probably going to be difficult for the smaller NGOs. Let us talk a little bit about what are these NGOs. Let's talk about these NGOs. What are they good at? So they are small. They know their business very well. They are very closer to the community. They are extremely less bureaucratic, if I may say so, and extremely good at programming, and they will stay there. And for the support functions for them is probably something that they're not very good at, and some other NGOs kind of take that kind of challenge and support them and handhold them, but they always push them to concentrate on the job that they're good at, which is working with the community, delivering on the programs and things like that. My sense is, which is very early to comment, with this, focus on financial utilization is something what I'm scared of, and I'm apprehensive. Will that in some way divert their attention from their core business, which they're good at? We are saying, okay, now everyone needs to focus on finances, focus on, the whole issue of utilization of money is becoming a big focus, rather than how my work is actually going to help someone that I'm working for. So this is a dilemma that smaller NGOs may face. Their mind will always be this whole the ghost called underspends will hound all of us, and probably more them. So will they be slightly defocused and diverted from their core business, which they are good at, is one concern. And the second one is for people like us, yes, we are okay in terms of this thing, but will we at this level be worried that, okay, coming March, let us spend money, otherwise I have to return, or the corporates will be in problem. I mean, there are donors, we don't want them to be in problem, so we will focus. Whereas our overall issue is that if it is a 4-year project, can we be flexible? Can we focus on impact? Can we focus on our implementers? Can we make sure we implement well and deliver the program as per the donor needs, as per our own strategy? If January onwards we start focusing on money, and we know that the whole thing is moving towards a CFO certification than the CSR heads saying yes to it. So how will that play out? I really don't know, but I must admit I am apprehensive about that. Is the whole thing going to be financial utilization focused rather than development and program delivery focused? If that happens, probably, I think this is a kind of similar problem both for people like us and people like who you call as smaller NGOs, and how will they manage? My sense is probably going forward, this will gradually get addressed, but definitely in this short term, it's going to create a little bit of problems in the both in the operation and in the minds of people. I mean, that's what I very genuinely feel.
Great, Mr. Mohanty, I thank you so much for that. And I now move to Chetan. And Chetan, I wanted you to sort of there is a huge debate on, and I think at the crux of the longer term project, and what you can show as unspent money or CSR account, etc. At the crux of that is this differentiation that you have to do to two projects, and you have to do that differentiation from this year onwards. So what is your take, and what are your views on, what you can call an in-year project or what you can call a multi-year project, and how will this overall impact, the way you're actually, running your CSR? So your interpretation of this as a professional, and then some practical maybe views on how it is being done would be very useful for all of us to know.
Yeah, so Rohit, I think, we honestly, we're still looking for more clarity on this, because it's one of those things which looks very reasonable on paper. But when it comes to the actual ground realities, this kind of a distinction can also be counterproductive. I would say that right now we are looking at this distinction being made from the perspective of whether an intervention is required in a short-term format or is it required in a long-term ongoing kind of format. And the year that has just gone past is actually a very good example, because the way that we have at least functioned, and I think a lot of other CSRs have also functioned similarly, is that we've done some very specific interventions which were directed towards COVID relief efforts. Now, that clearly is a short-term kind of an intervention. I mean, we're all hoping that this is going to be a very short-term intervention, and we would not have to, keep spending on COVID relief, and this scourge goes away quickly. But, looking at it from the policy perspective now, the amount that I've spent on COVID relief over the last 1 year is strictly something which has been done as a as an annual perspective. We started the year by having to change a lot of our plans to carve out certain funds for COVID relief. And we went about doing it in a very structured kind of a manner, where we defined that, okay, for us, this is what COVID relief would mean. These are the beneficiaries who we are going to be working for. These are the different ways in which we are going to provide the relief. And we've stuck to a plan, we've stuck to a structure over there. Of course, it's not possible in something like this to do a kind of a baseline and an end line, which you would want to do in the long-term projects. And therefore, for something like this, the short term will be more in terms of saying that, okay, we've distributed X number of ration kits, we've distributed these many PPE kits or whatever, with a clear structure in place that, okay, these have actually reached the people who they are intended to reach, and having a mechanism to ensure that this has actually happened. For the longer term projects, and that is where I say that we are still looking for more clarity. If I were to give you the example of the way that we at the foundation function, and Rohit, you are aware that we've been implementing the SMART program for a long time. Now, we look upon the SMART program as an ongoing project with a definite start time of October 2012, but very deliberately not having an end goal, because we believe that the work that we are doing in terms of skill development of youth is by nature and by necessity an ongoing intervention which is required in the geographies where we are operating. And within all these 8-9 years that we've been implementing it, we've tried to make incremental changes. We've brought in new kind of variants, we've brought in new courses. All of that has been ongoing, but the projects that we run within this, or if I can call the centers, the sub projects, many of them have had a finite period, because we've had to phase out certain projects because they were not performing to expectations. There were some cases where we actually realized that in that particular community, mobilization of youth was becoming difficult for whatever reasons. So now, therefore, do I consider this center as a project, or do I consider the entire SMART program as a project from the CSR bill point of view, we've chosen to consider the SMART program as a project because that's what it is for us. I mean, similarly, what we are doing through the SMART academies, where we have actually set up fairly comprehensive institutions to address skill development in healthcare from a long-term perspective, as a long-term project, ongoing project, which does not have a finite end date. So that's how we are kind of interpreting it. And I feel that in the long term, what I do expect to happen is that I think corporates and funders in general, I think will be compelled to be more structured and mindful in designing their programs, because coupled with the emphasis that this has given to impact assessment, I think companies will be forced to look at interventions which have a measurable and sustainable impact in the communities that they meant to serve. I think it's not fair to hold any funder or any corporate that, okay, you must end the project now, because in some of the work that we do, the work is such that it has to be ongoing in that particular community that we are working for. And therefore, one will have to find ways of interim measurement of whether your overall progress is in the right direction or not. And those are checks and balances that we have effectively built into all our programs. But to say that, okay, we are going to run this project for X years, bring it to a close, and then go in for the impact assessment, which is what the bill currently says, I think there is some tweaking definitely which is required there.
Great, Chetan. That was very sort of useful perspective. I do agree that more clarity is required on start dates and end dates and periods, and there would be several interpretations. So I'd now request Sudhir ji to talk a little bit about his view on the impact assessments. And I know initially you had mentioned, Sudhir ji, that it is a welcome move, and I think all our panelists, including Mr. Mohanty, feel that it is going to add value to the manner in which you're going to conduct CSR. So if Sudhir ji, if you could also give your view on how will impact assessment be the determiner of a classification of a project, or do you first classify and then do the impact as per the law? So what is your view? Because as Chetan mentioned that ultimately the project should have an objective and should achieve impact, and that could be after 7 years, after 8 years, etc. And the impact assessment should actually measure that. So which is the chicken and which is the egg? And what is your view on this? You're on mute, sir. You're on mute, sir.
Yeah. You see, I don't want to sound very critical on this. My personal experience of being in CSR domain, and I myself, in fact, drove and implemented CSR. My viewpoint, my views on this is that, and also companies largely, they are in its initial stage of understanding how to really drive CSR. CSR is not about a project. Even in the government parlance, and also when I hear that also they are talking about projects, I feel very sad. So they are equating CSR with a number of projects a company will undertake, in CSR. CSR is a thought, is a philosophy, and the projects simply is one of the means to reach or to actually help company, reach the philosophy. So that is where the gap is, and which is where we are not really able to address what exactly CSR, if at all I have to speak in the language of corporate philanthropy, we have to deliver. We have not been able to link it to the national agenda. We are simply, the companies are simply looking at the local things they have to, and they are being forced. Even the act is forcing them to spend 2%. So 2%, as Chetanji has rightly put out, as he said that small projects, big projects, something, some projects actually have to be seen in a longer term perspective. If health condition has to be improved, then it has to be done in longer term. But having said that, I said that, and also this impact assessment definitely is a good move, is a very welcome move, and it is going to make impacts on 3 counts. Number one, definitely, as Chetanji also said, it is going to bring professionalism in CSR. Right now, professionalism is lacking in CSR. Simply, money has to be spent. That is why you just ask 2, 3, 4, as many NGOs to submit project proposals, and depending on the merit, whether it really links to the liking of the top management, just sanction the projects and get it implemented, and then everything finishes over there. So that I think this particular impact assessment is going to demand or seek companies to be more professionals in terms of, I'll tell you later, but in terms of planning, implementation, and measurement, everything wise. The second thing, and also impact assessment is going to make CSR results measurable. So I'm using now phrase like CSR results, and CSR results have to be measurable, which is not in the present. And third, I will say that it will make CSR more transparent and accountable. Now, let me quickly explain how. The first thing, and also I have the problem with the word impact assessment. We don't understand what exactly impact means, outcomes mean, outputs mean, and simply we jump onto impact assessment. So I would suggest, or rather I would recommend to the government of India to change this phraseology to results assessment. So let us use results assessment, which will have assessment of outputs, then assessment of outcomes, and then impacts, which is long-term thing, right? So results will see companies to plan their philanthropic activities by using either results-based management, which is RBM, or LFA, logical framework analysis tool. This is very much required. Hardly no company, I would be wrong to say, there are a few companies definitely using this thing, but majority, I would say that they are not. So to bring professionalism, I think these tools have to be used.
So I would like to butt in here, Synergy, and play the timekeeper. So thank you. Thank you for your words and your views on the 3 aspects of on impact and your views. May I with your permission move to the next question, sir? Just from a time management perspective. So thank you so much for that, Sudhirji. I move on to Anurag. As Sudhirji mentioned, and and Mr. Mohanty too sort of alluded to this. What is your view on the CFO certification? And do you feel that this is an additional layer of governance which is necessary, etc., or do you think it's just it's just going to make things more difficult for everyone? It'd be good to hear your views on that.
Right. So Rohit, I'll just take a step back on different points which has been raised by eminent panelists, and especially Mr. Mohanty, where he said that we should not move in a direction where spending become the core area rather implementing the project. And that's so true for last financial year. During COVID time, how different project move in a different direction. Now imagine if this law was there and you have project uploaded on your website and you have all approvals in place, and all of a sudden, unfortunate situation like this comes, then where do you stand? Then a lot of organization will have unspent balance, which happened last year. Everyone, I think each one of us reworked the entire budget of organization to ensure the salaries goes while project doesn't run. So that's a very difficult situation we are in today also. that when you are going to the board and the committee and maybe even the CFO to say, okay, these are the list of projects which probably I will be doing. Today, I don't have that comfort, at least from my perspective, individual, that whether this is right, given the current scenario, your priorities will change drastically, So that is one aspect. The second aspect is, from the CFO sign-off perspective, I believe that is fairly okay in the sense that since the money is being put in, and rather I would say, I will say what Mr. Sinha talked about, that it is not about spending money, it is about investing money for a right purpose. Now, if a company is investing so much of money for a certain purpose, I think CFO should have an oversight on what is happening. And I believe in certain companies, it is already happening. So for few, it may not be something new. So I don't think that will be a big issue. But yes, now wherever CFO probably was not part of the CSR committee, one has to look at that CFO probably become a part of CSR committee to have a broad oversight on what is happening. Plus, when we are going for certification, that means certain more assurance has to be put in place. And again, here, there are two perspectives. One, the program run directly by company, the structure would be very different. And the program run a bit differently like us, where Cipla Foundation is a different entity, the structure would be very different. But broadly speaking, I don't see that as a big challenge till the time that is well represented, well documented, and well presented. The ambiguity is only that we are living in a very volatile situation where things are drastically changing. If I give you an example, I was in a call with an organization who is doing work on COVID, and they were presenting to us that this is what they want to do. And this is a matter of, a laughable matter, that first question which I asked this organization was, have you registered yourself on CSR form? That was the first question I asked. And that was unfortunate. So I should have not asked, but I don't have any choice because I know that if it's not registered, then I cannot move forward. So that's the ambiguity we are living in. And as Chetan rightly mentioned, I think after 2014, things were a bit settled down in 5-6 years on understanding. Again, we are unfortunately at the same situation, which may take another 2-3 years to understand how to decode, these things which has come in perspective. To your specific question, Rohit, I think it's a welcome move. And from our perspective, we believe that better the system and processes within the institution is, better would be this oversight from CFOs.
Right. So I think that's a fair point, Anurag, that it might take a little time to settle in, etc. So whenever a new stakeholder comes in many companies, they're already involved. In other companies, they might want some processes to be tweaked, etc. So there is a settling in period. But, I really liked, what, Mr. Sinha mentioned earlier about this dilemma of the word of the CSR committee and board being kind of used interchangeably. It's a public forum, so I would not like to use, perhaps the term loosely. So I don't know if it has been really thought through as to who's going to be doing what. And, Mr. Sinha really set the context, in a very, in a very relevant manner. So, from, your perspective, Anurag, you're such a well-governed company, you're a listed company, etc. The board, mandate is very, 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 very strong. What's the thought which is happening, and what is your view?
From our perspective, in the last those two committee meetings which we had post this regulation, our realization was that committee is very serious on the accountability which has been put in place, and they have been guiding very strongly the entire foundation team and the committee on the structure which has to be put in place. And in fact, to an extent, that what are the good practices. So I believe that this will be largely driven by what are the good practices which is being done in the ecosystem by different companies. And of course, till this time it was CSR committee who was fully responsible. Now it has gone to the board. So even CSR committee is also feeling that when it goes to the board, recommended by them, how they ensure that they have fully verified and certified each and everything which has gone to the board. So I believe it will take some time, and we are also trying to figure out what practices we should put in place when we present these things to the committee. In fact, one of the suggestions which also came was that, and this is a suggestion which came from few other corporates also, that do we need a assurance audit in between, maybe 6 monthly or 9 monthly, a sort of assurance audit, and not someone new coming in, but your internal auditor can give an assurance report, which can go to the committee or can go to the board saying that whatever is required to be complied with is being complied. So those are few of the discussion which is happening. I think we have to wait and watch and move forward as in how it moves forward. But I think this COVID has taken a toll in sense that there's a lot of ambiguity. We don't know which project you will be doing. Of course, there are certain standard projects which you will be doing, but then there are certain immediate requirement at what time you will be approving and how you are prioritizing. Those are something which are still a bit debatable.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Anurag, that you bring in all these regulations and the projects themselves are uncertain, because, and even the budget outlays are uncertain, because it was so last year, and now again we are probably going through another year where there would be diversions in budget, so would be multiple approvals, etc. So point well taken. So thank you for that, Anurag. And I'd like Chetan to kind of collaborate on whether some of these changes are easier when you have a foundation. I do recall this whole debate of doing CSR directly, etc. And at times the foundation route being analyzed by some companies perhaps only as a means to manage the money or the fund utilization to ensure a 2% outlay. So what? Yeah, what is your view of how your company and your foundation kind of views these changes, and do you feel that having a foundation makes it actually simpler in some of these things, or it's the same irrespective of whether you have one or not?
Well, I personally have always been a votary of especially large corporates having a separate foundation. I mean, though, of course, I must qualify this by saying that I've only been part of those corporates which have had a large foundation. So apart from Tech Mahindra earlier, briefly, I was with Bharti Foundation, which is also a separate corporate foundation. But clearly, from the standpoint of making a clear statement of commitment, I think having a separate foundation, you definitely are sort of, sending that clear signal that, we take our CSR seriously, and that's something which is useful when you have foundation. Also, in terms of making things more effective, I think from that standpoint also having a separate foundation is useful. I think having a separate foundation, it can come more easily under the ambit of a social development organization, which is what it is meant to be. Because if it is wrapped as part of the corporate, making that distinction becomes, I guess, difficult. So having a separate foundation in general, I think is, to me, a better way of doing things. What, from the amendment or from the CSR bill point of view, honestly, difficult to say whether, it is better or not. Of course, some of the anomalies and some of the things, I mean, I'll give you a very interesting example of an anomaly that we recently discovered. Our head of finance recently pointed out that the Companies Act does not make a Section 8 company, which is what we are, okay, not qualified for Section 35. So technically, if we are having a surplus of 5 crores, we also have to spend on CSR. So I mean, it was a very interesting kind of thing that struck me, that
there are some schools, etc., also, which are very profitable, which have to do CSR.
Exactly. Yeah. Also, one point that I would want to make, Rohit, not necessarily in response to this question, but in general, why I feel that we need to be more careful about having too many regulations, because I always maintain that, the work of corporate foundations and the social sector in general should be to push the envelope when it comes to innovation and experimentation. We know that the government, because of the sheer scale, may not be able to be experimental, whereas I think it is, for us, important to invest in being experimental and innovative. And as we all understand that, making things too regulated does not lend itself well to experimentation. So that's a clear flip side that I see here, where I think it's important that we understand that, you know, regulating things too much is going to take away some of that sheen in terms of bringing about the necessary innovation in when we do our work in social development. So I would like to sort of close with this remark, which I very strongly feel about.
Sure. Thank you for that, Chetan. So I move to Sudhir ji, and I think then there's one last question for Mr. Mohanty, and I think we are doing well on time. We are at 4:23, so we have two more questions, and then we can, we can see, what the audience has for us. So Sudhir ji, as Chetan mentioned that, there are this, many regulations which are coming up, and, one thing which is probably not so well talked about, or shall I say debated, is the fact that a corporate now has to have much more information in the public domain. And so what are your views on this? Is this good, bad, and what is the level of detailing that you should go to? And how much of it is what you can really put out in the public domain? I mean, I take an example of what Anurag, Chetan, everybody has been mentioning of the uncertain times we're in, right? So do you go ahead and put the budgets of your projects on your website, and then run the risk of having to, sort of change them quarter on quarter? So, really, it'd be very interesting to hear your views on this, Mr. Sinha.
No, I would say it is dealing with stakeholders. If your communities are one set of stakeholders, and they are expecting you to be very transparent on what you are going to do and how much you are going to do, and that is going to help company. If company does not disclose that how much is the budget to the stakeholders like communities, they will never get to know, and they will never the company will never be able to manage their expectations. And this is where companies get caught up in the sense that, so company will be complaining that, despite doing so much, communities are unhappy, right? So communities, they say that communities are thankless stakeholders. They are not acknowledging how much we are doing. Point is that, so you have to be knowing who the stakeholders you are going to deal with, and who are the key and important, critical and important stakeholders. And I think to bring transparency, there is no harm putting out your entire things in public domain. Otherwise, also people have access to those informations. If communities want to know as to how much a company has to spend within the 2% limit, then communities can get to know by seeking help from people like you and I. Definitely we can tell that, okay, this is the profit of this company last year or 3 years average is this, and 2% becomes so much. So that is where also I would say the company has to be very transparent, and it is in the interest of the company if they become transparent, definitely. So that's where also I would suggest that they have to first identify who the key stakeholders are. And mind you, these reports, CSR reports, they are sharing. And I just give you one example. When I was working for ArcelorMittal, and then I floated an idea that we should publish our annual reports or CSR reports in as many languages we can, especially when we are working in Karnataka, then it should be in Kannadiga. If we are working in Odisha, it should be in Odia. And Jharkhand, it should be in Hindi. And that's how there was initial resistance, but thereafter also management could understand why it is important to disclose in so many languages. So that's where so one has to be very innovative in the sense that it's not innovation. I think you have to meet the expectations of your stakeholders. That is it. Simple.
Great. I think that was very well put, Sudhir ji. One last word, from you, Mr. Mohanty, for all our, NGO friends in the audience. will it take something different now to raise money, from corporates and corporate foundations? Has the law now made, changes, and if so, what are these changes which which people would have to adopt to be able to walk up very confidently to to Anurag or to Chetan and present a proposal and get money? So we will take that question from you, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. Over to you, Mr. Mohan.
Yeah, thanks, Rohit. I mean, to be honest, I mean, I have huge amount of respect for implementing agencies, NGOs, and their abilities to adapt to newer situation, abilities to adapt to changes. So I personally don't think this is going to be a big issue in terms of getting funds from the corporates. I'm sure both the parties will understand each other given the changes that are coming in. However, I mean, I don't want to stay at a very philosophical level, but want to tell my NGO friends that there is no other way than delivering program better. So if we do that, I don't think there is an issue with the corporates. People like Mr. Anurag or Mr. Kapoor will have issues with that. But the key is that we must deliver. We must deliver on the impact that we have committed. However, there is one thing that I must also say, is that let us, in view of the changes, let us very quickly assess our capacity gaps in terms of compliance, in terms of what is that now we have to differently deliver, and therefore do we have the required capacity and competences in-house with our partners, or do we have to do something to address those issues? And then I am sure once you are very honest about this and talk to people like Anurag and all, I am sure they will listen to us, and they will be, I mean, I'm sure that they are patient, they will be now kinder and make sure that, okay, there are X, Y, Z capacity gaps, and therefore we must make provisions for addressing some of these. But overall, I don't think this particular change or these changes is actually are not going to affect the fundraising for the NGOs so much if we have actually committed to our cause and are committed to the impact. I mean, reversely, probably I think this will help us more who are committed to a cause, who are committed to impact, who are committed to showing that, okay, districts will be transformed in 3-4 years' time. And I'm sure the corporates will understand that, okay, here is an agency who is committed to transform the communities in 4 years' time, and therefore I must be part of their journey, rather than saying I have some money and take it and use it in this way or that way. I mean, I'm sure the corporates will change, saying that, okay, here is an agency which has a dream, which has a conviction that in 4 years' time they will bring in these changes in the community. So therefore, let me be part of this journey rather than the reverse. So I'm very hopeful that this is not going to affect the fundraising capabilities of the NGOs.
So great, very good, Mr. Mohanty. On that positive note, there are a lot of questions coming up on the chat box. So we do have 10 12 minutes to answer these questions. I'm not so sure whether we will be able to answer all of them. So we will be flashing an email ID at the end of this seminar. So do write into us for any further queries. We will respond to you, and if you want to seek a consultation from us, we will be happy to engage with you on a consultation going forward as well. I would now pass on, to my colleague Abhishek. Abhishek, for the questions, please.
Right. Thank you, sir. Honestly, we've got more than 40 questions here. And what I'll do a rapid fire with you first on questions which are objective and where we do not need any further information, so they can be really objective. And then in between that, Chetan and Anurag can jump into share their views also as a corporate, how they are implementing it. And if you feel that some of the questions can't be answered, then we can take that up later also over emails with whoever has posted it. Okay. First and the foremost question is are the mandatory changes applicable for FY 2021, or are they applicable for the upcoming FI, which is, I believe, the ongoing FI?
So there is no blanket answer. Technically, it is for 2021, but there are nuances in between, the law, and one will have to discuss that further, where you can take a more liberal interpretation.
Okay, perfect. Next question is, who is supposed to apply for CSR 1? What if the company is implementing the projects itself?
So our view on that, and Chetan and Anurag, please jump in, is that whoever is doing the implementation needs to fill up the CSR 1. If it is a foundation, they need to apply for the CSR 1. If it's the company, they have to apply for the CSR 1. If it is a third-party NGO, they have to apply for a CSR 1. So, Chetan, am I right?
That's right. That's absolutely right, Rohit. That's how we are going about it, because we are doing both direct implementation and implementation through NGO partners. So we have ourselves already registered on CSR1, and have also sent out a note to all our NGO partners that they have to do so. In fact, we've circulated a form in which they have to give their details of registration as well.
Yeah.
So things are important. Rohit, two more things are important. Right. I think 12A and 80G certifications are required for any NGO applying for Form 1 CSR.
Sir, just on that, Sudhir sir, so there is a question. I'll bring that question up here. So there is a question that what if, let's say before 31st of March 2021, if the NGO had a valid 12A and 80G, let's say it was granted in FY 2021, do they have to reapply or renew it, or will it remain valid?
They don't have to apply for 80G and 12A. They have to simply apply to Ministry of Corporate Affairs to fill up the form 1, CSR form 1, and giving in their this information that my NGO has already 12A and 80G certified.
Right. But as a general window, all NGOs have to apply between April 1 to June 30th.
Right.
So while Sudhirji is right that it's not linked up with your application for CSR 1, the timing in a sense has coincided.
Correct.
And I guess that's the reason for the question, because the government was late in opening the portal, and though it was applicable from April 1, the portal opened only on April 1 or the 31st of March in the evening. So in a sense, the interpretation is that you can go ahead with your existing 80G and 12A, but you still need to do that further application or renewal within the window of April 1 to June 30th, and that's applicable for all, irrespective of whether you already have one or not.
Right, perfect. Another important question is around the admin expenses. Whether the cap of 5% is applicable on implementing agencies. If yes, what if they spend beyond 5%, can the company will be held responsible for the same?
So as Mr. Mohanty also mentioned that technically it is not applicable on the implementing agency. However, if you look at good practice or best practice, there is a concept of mirroring, and eventually mirroring would more underlie the spirit of the law. But yes, for pure compliance, it's only applicable on the company and not on the implementing.
Fair enough. Next question is about the expenditure. So there are different ways to this question, sir. I'll give you 2-3 scenarios and you can answer one by one. One of the scenario is, let's say there is a multi-year project and the company has contributed the money in one go to the NGO, which is supposed to spend the money over 2-3 years. Now, how would the company book this expenditure? Should they book it year on year, or should they just book it in one go? So that's one scenario you can answer, and then I'll bring in the other scenarios also.
Right. So I'll let Chetan answer that. Give it a shot and then I'll answer, because it's a tough one. I think I might not be able to give a conclusive answer. But yeah, Chetan, you go first, and then I'll.
Well, no,
you.
I wish I had a conclusive answer to this, Rohit. See, we have always been, working with our NGO partners on an annual basis. So we do seek a budget every year. So in that case, in our case, we release funds on an annual basis, so it's relatively easier. But honestly, I'll have to check with my CFO that if we were to give the funds for, let's say, a 3-year project at one go, how would that be treated? So
yeah, so it's this whole debate of so Dhirji, it's this whole debate of whether CSR can be booked by a corporate only on the basis of spent. And now with the unspent CSR money also coming in, if you have a window of already know and already commit for 3 years, you might not expend that amount, but you'll have to park it in an escrow account. So in a sense, it depending on the structure of the whether you have a foundation or how you're working, the unspent CSR could have a different connotation in terms of parking aside the funds, but yet not directly giving out to your implementing agency.
But I give you the argument. There are two ways it can be done. One is that a company can definitely give full amount to be spent over a period of 3 to 5 years, right? And it says that, okay, so this is from FY 1920 or 2021, actually, so I have paid. The argument company can give that I don't know my what my profit going to be next year. So in order to give full commitment, I would like, I have money now, so I'm going to give money to the NGO for the fullest commitment, and that's why to meet the full commitment, and so I'm making this fund available, which I'll keep reporting. Maybe so I'm just making my money transfer to the NGO this year, and I meet my commitment, and then commitment does not end there. And every year, as and when and also money is being spent by the NGO, I will simply put it in my report. So that's one way.
Right. So I think a lot of emphasis, Abhishek, on utilization certificates.
Right.
And with all these different nuances coming in, the matching of how much you give out and how much you're spending, but the spending of the implementing partner needs to be closer. There has to be a closer watch with the annual action plan, with the with the spend cycle, with the different stakeholders coming in. Definitely there has to be more collaboration and more models. So one hybrid model which is being talked about is that you start off with an advanced model. Obviously, because otherwise an NGO can't start the work. But then you track it, and if you have quarterly utilization certificates, you track it and convert it into a reimbursement model, maybe for the last quarter.
Right.
So that you can then just make sure that what you have committed is exactly what is spent. Otherwise, you will just be chasing for utilization certificates, and you would not know unless there is very close collaboration between the NGO and the corporate, and the NGO meets the timing of the corporate's release of the annual report. And it's definitely much tougher in case of listed companies, because they release their annual reports and they close their books faster. And the NGOs are no way in tandem, or they have that capacity to be able to do it in with that speed, especially since the last quarter's utilization certificate is usually the audited one. Right. The ones in between might be unaudited, but the last one needs to be audited, and it becomes difficult to match the time.
Perfect. A quick one: can two private limited companies collaborate to undertake CSR project? Do they need to jointly form a Section 8 company or a trust or a society to implement the project, or is it okay to implement the project without jointly forming this set of an entity till the time they are able to report the impact separately?
Yes, Sudhirji.
Yeah, I think so. Without forming any corporate foundation, they can do it. Simple thing is that the act is very clear that two or more companies can come together and implement a particular project. The only thing that every company is accountable for its own funding and which they have to report. So that is the only thing they have to do, but not necessarily they have to form as a foundation for that matter and then implement a project.
Okay, perfect. A quick one on COVID. So expenses undertaken by a company on, let's say, PP kits, masks, sanitizers, or even awareness trainings of employees, is it covered under CSR?
Chetan, have you claimed it, or are you planning to claim it?
Again, I mean, it's not something which I can answer right away, Rohit, off the bat.
Yeah,
it has been allowed. It has been allowed. It has been actually. It is considered as CSR.
allowed. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was a notification which came out in addition to what Anurag had mentioned as part of the amendments on the research. There were a couple of notifications which came out which allowed COVID-related expenditure as CSR expenditure, and however, COVID-related expenditure towards your employees was still not included.
COVID-related research has been allowed till 2022-23.
Right, sir.
Yeah, and thereafter nothing so far.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, that's it. I mean, there were some incomplete queries also around capital assets, around transfers. How do they do the transfers? I can, raise that question. It was about what if the assets, are old? How do we, really transfer those assets to the implementing agency or to the beneficiaries? Is there a particular procedure to transfer those assets? Should we leave it and, just make it applicable from going forward? How do we look at that?
So I think the law gives you a 180-day window and then a further 90-day window by the board. Going forward, you have to do it kind of simultaneously, but the window that the law gives you in terms of this time is for the old assets itself. So if they are lying in the company's books, then they have around 270-day window, to be able to complete that transfer. There is not that much clarity if those assets are already fully depreciated as to whether you would still need to undertake that transfer or not. But to be on the conservative side, it's probably better to have the documentation and to ensure that especially material capital assets are either transferred to the implementing agency or to a beneficiary group.
Right, right. Just one last thing, sir, before I share that email ID. So I think it's a clarification. It will be good if you can emphasize what should the companies do if they have unspent amount, let's say from last 1 year or 2 years. What do they do now? When the new financial year has started. So what is the best way to take care of those expenses? If let's say, we can take two scenarios. One is that they couldn't find the project, or the project couldn't really start. And the other situation could be that, the project happened sometime, but due to COVID and all, it could not continue. And now the companies are sitting on some unspent expenditure. So for both these two situations, if you could share your views, and then, we can close these webinar.
So on the unspent piece, there, it's very, you can use that in the current year, and that that issue is probably more pertinent to companies which have not reached that 2% threshold. So then you could use that unspent CSR amount for the projects going back, etc., and then claim it as your CSR expense, at least for the current year. For companies who have already achieved their 2%, the scenario becomes a little different, because if you do use the window of the unspent CSR, then you would be exceeding that 2%. And then again, you would have an excess for that year, which you would then track as sort of set off for the next year. So my opinion on that is that the unspent CSR should be done in terms of earnest for ongoing projects where there is a longer term commitment. And it should not really be used as a planning window or a plug and play window to be able to sort of achieve, that 2% number.
Perfect. Great, sir.
May I supplement you, Rohitji?
Sure, sir.
May I
Please,
supplement you, Rohitji?
please, sir.
I think there are two ways. There are two ways, and also this can be treated. One, especially with regard to ongoing projects, you have clear-cut ongoing projects for which and also treatment is going to be different. But what Abhishek has stated, I think these are not ongoing projects. It is unspent, right? So treatment of this thing has to be done differently. Within September this year, there has to be a say escrow account open, and this amount, unspent amount, has to be transferred. So only a window of 6 months has been given from April till September. Within that period, only this amount has to be transferred. But this money cannot be transferred back to the books of account of a company.
Right. Great.
Right. So I believe, we tried to answer a lot of queries, but I'm sure there are other queries also which we couldn't address. So we request you to please send in your queries on this email ID with a clear subject on as CSR queries. We'll do through a consultation to in whichever way it is possible. I hope this is visible to everybody.
Yeah. Thank you, Abhishek. It's very visible. And let me, use this opportunity to thank, our expert panel. Thank you so much, Anurag, for taking the time. I know how busy you are, and thank you so much, Chetan. Thank you so much, Sudhirji, and thank you, Mr. Mohanty. It's been an absolute delight. And I would also like to announce that we will have a part 2 of this very interesting discussion, which will further take on some of these concepts. And I think we'll try and do this after about a month and a half or so, when there are further interpretations, and all of us become clearer and clearer about certain nuances of the law. So we will have another round of this seminar. And thank you to the audience. Thank you for joining in. Thank you to the panelists on behalf of Grant Thornton. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rohit. Thank you. Stay safe and stay healthy, everyone.
Thank you so much.
You.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Anurag. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye.